Good morning and welcome once again to our webinar series. Today, we focus on fraud in SMEs. For those of you joining us for the first time, thank you for joining us. And for those of you who have been following our series, we also appreciate your time. And so let me give a bit of a background. According to research from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, ACFE, reports to the nation, it's estimated that global businesses and organizations lose approximately 5% of their total annual revenue to occupational fraud. That's fraud committed against an organization by its own officers, directors, or employees. The hefty price of occupational fraud, also known as workplace fraud, translates to roughly about 7 billion in losses each year to businesses and organizations across the world. Is the story any different in Ghana? Yes, we are here to have a discussion on that. And today our topic is how Ghanaian SMEs can prevent occupational fraud. With me to do the discussion are two gentlemen, Emil and Nanaba. So before I go on, let me ask Emil to introduce himself. Emil.
Yes, Amos, thanks for having me. My name is Emil. My partner with SCG. I've been with the firm for close to 11 years. I've worked with the audit unit extensively across different sectors and industries.
Okay, so Nanaba.
Okay. Amos, thank you for having me here. My name is Nanaba, a data analyst. I'm also with the audit unit, and I've been with the firm for close to 4 years.
Okay, so thank you, gentlemen, for the brief introduction. Today, our objective for this webinar is to actually understand what fraud is and the type of fraud SMEs are prone to, and why SMEs are mostly at risk. And we'll share some tips on how to prevent fraud in SMEs. My name is Amos Edu, and I'll be your host for today's program. So let me quickly start with Emil. Emil, so what is happening around fraud in the country currently?
Yeah, so if as a Ghanaian business, now more than ever, you actually face an increased risk of fraud. According to a recent Afrobarometer report, about 53% of Ghanaians believe that corruption has increased in the past year. We can understand from recent reports that the cost of living in the country has also increased. Our society is also becoming more and more accommodating of fraud. And there's this get rich quick mentality that's also increasing in our society. And this is affecting businesses. So if you look at all these conditions, as a business owner, now more than ever, you actually face an increased risk of fraud because of the environment that we find ourselves.
Oh, okay. So let me just remind our audience that if you have any question, you can post them in the Q&A box below, and we will attend to all questions at the end of the session. So keep your questions coming in, and also note that your mics are muted to prevent any feedback in the course of the presentation. So Nanaba, let me come to you. Can you support us with any statistics in Ghana?
Yes, Amos. In 2019, the Bank of Ghana issued a report on the occurrence of fraud in the banking sector. And the key highlights of their findings from the report is that attempted fraud amounted to 115 million Ghana cedi, out of which actual losses was 33 million, and with 82 million being recovered. As you can see, there's just a snapshot of a wider problem in the country.
Indeed, it's a snapshot of a wider problem in the country. So we'll see. So Emil, when we say fraud, when we talk of fraud in SMEs, what exactly is fraud?
Yeah, so fraud very simply is getting personal gain through deception. And today we are focusing on occupational fraud, which is using one's occupation, to make personal gains through deliberate use or misapplication of companies' resources. So using someone's, you work for a business and you use the company resources for your own personal gain. That's basically what occupational fraud is.
So in a simple man's language, it's just stealing.
Yes, theft is one of the is one of the biggest types of fraud. So Nana will give us more information on that, as we go along.
Okay, so then, Nana, what are the typical types of fraud SME should be concerned about in Ghana?
Okay, so as an SME, there are three main types of fraud that you need to be concerned about. These are theft, asset misuse, and financial statement fraud. As Emil said, theft is the most basic type of fraud that you should be concerned about. This involves stealing of the company's monetary. This involves stealing of the company's monetary and non-monetary assets. The company's monetary assets can be your cash, your Momo, your bank account, and your non-monetary items are your inventory, consumables, and supplies. Other forms of theft include check forgery, falsifying expense claims, unauthorized withdrawals of funds, and cyber theft. Cyber theft is using the internet to trick individuals in order to obtain their personal and financial information. As you can tell, there are certain instances where you receive random emails from people telling you that you've won some amount of money which you didn't do anything to inherit. So these are all basic types of cyber theft. The other type is asset misuse. The assets of the business, such as the company vehicles, computers, and office supplies, could be misused by the staff for their personal activities instead of focusing on the business activities. And finally, the financial statement fraud is simply false accounting. That's manipulating the financial statement in order to show a position for the benefits of the company. And this is mostly done by management and company officials, where they either understate their liabilities or overstate their sales in order to show a good performance, to get loans, and also to get some kind of compensation if their compensation is tied or bonuses are tied to the performance of the business, as well as to, in other instances, to pay lower tax to the government.
Wow, this is interesting, because if top management can engineer such fraud, by understating or manipulating their financial statements to show a good standing, which may not be true, then to access, say, facilities from the bank, it puts a lot of people at risk, especially even depositors at risk.
It does.
And that is quite serious.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So, Emil, so why are SMEs mostly at risk when it comes to occupational fraud?
Okay, so as an SME, look at the structure of, how SMEs are. The risk of fraud occurring in your organization is heightened, because you as a small organization, you probably have a small number of employees performing multiple functions and roles, and this allows them to actually hide their fraudulent actions. Your staff also could become too familiar and trusting with each other. The other thing, as a small organization, as an SME, you probably don't have formal procedures. So things don't get recorded, things don't get done in the same way each time. And finally, management is sometimes unaware about risk. So they won't conduct a risk assessment and identify which risk they need to respond to reduce or mitigate. So because management is not aware about risk, staff are also not aware about risk. And this general unawareness about risk actually increases the risk of fraud happening in the organizations. Yeah.
So it's a management responsibility to set the tone. It has to come from top to the bottom,
Yes,
and that will send the right signals to the entire organization.
Yeah.
So, Emil, let me still continue with you. Is there any motivation why trusted? Because you made mention of why trusted employees could become risk.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
is there any motivation why trusted staff would commit fraud at all?
Yes. So there are three main reasons why staff commit fraud or people commit fraud in general. It's commonly referred to as the fraud triangle. So one is opportunity, two is incentive, and three is rationalization. Now, opportunity, which is the first one, is basically the circumstance that will create conditions for staff to steal from the business. This could include weak controls. It could also include inadequate accounting policies. So the accounting policies that will allow employees to manipulate accounting records for their personal benefit. The second one is incentive. This refers to pressure to commit fraud. So this could arise from a personal financial pressure like gambling. It could also come from bonus schemes that are based on targets. So for instance, sales staff could actually manipulate the sales results so that it can get bonuses. And then the final one is rationalization. And this is basically justification for committing fraud. So the person committing the fraud will try and justify the fraud to themselves. So they could, make a case that, the company is not paying me enough money. So, I have to steal to make up for what they are not paying me. They could also say management is stealing. They are stealing the big ones. So we can also steal the small ones.
Well, that's an assumption or reality.
Yeah, they do it to make themselves feel okay about it. Because
about what they are doing.
Yes, will tell you that's not good. But they'll basically say something justified. And there's this case of an accountant who took his company's petty cash of 12,000 Ghana cedis one Friday. And he actually took the money. He placed a bet with a sports betting company because, he felt that his team was going to win. That was his team's day. He figured out that with his earnings, he could replace the petty cash on Monday morning very early and pocket the profits. Unfortunately, his team had a bad day and he lost the bet. So the company fired him and made him refund the money. So looking at this case, there are three elements. The three elements of fraud that we discussed, I just discussed at play here. So there's opportunity, there's incentive, and there's rationalization. So the opportunity is coming from the weak controls that allow the accountant to take petty cash without any approval. Number two, the incentive was the pressure from a lifestyle that he couldn't support with his salary. And then number three, rationalization, he justified the fraud by telling himself that the company was not paying him a good salary. So he could actually go ahead and steal and perpetrate the fraud.
That's an interesting one, and I wonder which team he bet on and then they lost. But I think this is serious. So I think it's important that management create the environment where there is no opportunity for such fraud to even fester.
Yes.
Okay, yes. So it's important that we block that opportunity.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so Emil, if SMEs face such risk, and then what can they do to prevent this fraud in organizations?
Okay, so I'll give you 4 very simple tips, that you can even begin to implement today. Number 1 is that don't allow one employee to approve a transaction, hold the asset, and account for the transaction. I'll give you more details as we go along. Number 2, make sure that you know your employees well. Number 3 is to maintain robust internal controls and processes. And this is key to prevention of fraud. And number 4 is paying close attention to your bank accounts and petty cash. So when we talk about not allowing one employee to approve a transaction, hold the assets, and account for the transaction, there's a concept that is called the segregation of duties, which means that employees should not be given multiple conflicting roles that will allow them to commit fraud easily. So one employee should not approve a transaction, hold the asset, and record the transaction. So for instance, if you take petty cash, one employee should not approve the petty cash transaction. The same employee should not hold the asset, which is he should not keep the petty cash. And number 3, accounting. He should not account for the petty cash transaction, reconcile it, and then request for replenishment of petty cash. So allowing an employee to have, unfettered access by having the ability to approve transaction, hold the assets, and account for it, it makes it easy for them to misappropriate the assets. So what I would like to tell you here is that have at least 2 people handling these functions. If you can afford extra finance officers, you can use your front desk staff to take over some of the finance functions like holding the petty cash. There's a story of a successful vehicles servicing and repair Ghanaian business in the 90s that had to fold up due to fraud that was perpetrated by a trusted accountant. So this accountant had full access to the cash receipts. So when people came and they serviced their vehicles, they got repairs, they would go and pay the money to this accountant. And this accountant, because he had custody over the cash and was also responsible for accounting for the cash, he would take off some of the funds into his personal bank account, record a low amount, and deposit that smaller amount into the business bank account. Now, this went on for several years. The owner wakes up one morning to realize that the business had no money.
Wow.
Accountant had bolted, employees had to be let go, premises had to be sold to pay debts. Now,
Wow.
this could have been prevented if the accountant did not have full access to the assets without extra oversight. So the key here is don't allow one person, one employee to approve transaction, hold the asset, and account for it. Yeah.
And I think it's also important that a senior person gets involved in some of these processes.
Yes, so the
especially with the
person,
approval.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so the second point had to do with making sure you know your employees well. So occupational fraud is mainly committed by employees. You need to make sure that you hire honest and trustworthy people. So you can do this by implementing a formal hiring process that involves, a background check, reference checks. When you take the person's CV, he says he's worked here, he's gone to this school. It's a matter of making a call. Check whether they've done what they say they've done. And for those that will handle your key assets, like your cash, like your customer account information, do a criminal record check. Ask them to go to the CID headquarters and to get that criminal record done. And I'll tell you whether they have a history of committing such fraud. Also remember that long-serving and hardworking employees can also commit fraud when they are faced with financial pressure. So like we said that, before this, don't allow even your very trusted employees to have conflicting functions like approving transactions, holding assets, and accounting for these transactions. Also look out for sudden change in lifestyle of your employees. We are not saying that employees cannot have business on the side, but usually when someone is stealing, you see an immediate change in their lifestyle, their clothing, the vehicle they use, jewelry, etc. will show. And you can tell that the person's salary cannot support, what they are doing. And finally, make annual leaves mandatory. Fraud can be exposed when perpetrators are not around to cover their tracks. So make sure the leave is for at least 2 weeks. it allows you to catch whatever has gone on if the person is not around to cover their tracks.
So people must be made to go on leave.
Yes, it's
So
important.
yeah, it's a way to find out what is happening.
Yes.
Yeah, and you made a point on employees having a good lifestyle. I don't think you are suggesting that when people are making good money, they shouldn't dress nicely.
No, I'm not saying
Okay,
that.
but whatever they make must be made genuinely.
Yes.
Yes. And then you shouldn't take advantage of the companies they work for.
Yeah.
Nana, do you have something to add to that?
Yes, so I'll speak about the third point. That's maintaining strong internal controls and processes. Internal controls help businesses prevent and detect fraud. With regards to internal control, when enforcing it, you have to keep in mind that the concept about segregation of duties, which was spoken about by Emil, the essence of segregation of duties is that it prevents and blocks the opportunity for the occurrence of fraud to take place. Other measures of internal controls where you can implement include verification and approvals. You need to ensure that before a transaction is processed, it is verified before it is approved. For instance, when you take into consideration your payroll process, as a business owner, before you approve payroll to be paid, you can verify it by checking the previous month's payroll, how much was paid, and whether the amount that is going to be paid in the subsequent month agrees to the previous month before you continue to make the payment. That's an instance of verification. Other instances include before you pay out money to a supplier, you can check the amount being paid out to the invoice raised by the supplier, or if there's a contract in place. This helps you to prevent the opportunity from someone taking advantage of your business. Other measures include reconciliation. You see, as a business owner, you need to ensure that on a frequent basis, you need to reconcile key accounts and investigate where the differences are coming from. So for instance, for your bank account, you need to reconcile your bank statement balance as to what your accounting records are saying. And if there are any differences, you be able to identify and flag them out. The last one is supervision. It's essential for you to keep a close eye on your business, on your key assets, your inventory, and your cash. Enforce controls to make sure that you know what's happening to your business assets, how they are being used, and what is happening to them at all times.
I think one of the points that you've made, a very significant one, the reconciliation bit. Most companies are not too concerned. I mean, the SMEs particularly are not too concerned, and even the top management don't have much interest in what is happening to their finances, bank, what is moving out of the bank and coming in and all those things. All they know is that when there's money, they spend.
Yes.
And that's not good enough. By the time you are aware, something might have gone wrong.
Yes.
All right. So, following from Nane's point, he gave you some of the general controls like verification, approval, reconciliations, and supervision. Now, I like to delve down into some key controls for retail businesses. So I've picked two of the major assets that will come from a retail business. So cash from sales and then your inventory or your stocks. So some additional tips on controlling your sales or your cash from sales. So number one, we advise that be physically present to monitor your sales staff or have someone supervise them. And if you can't be present, you can, monitor the sales area with a CCTV. This will be recorded. So if something goes wrong, you can quickly play back and see what happened. We also advise that they should, on a daily basis, reconcile the cash that you received from sales to the sales records. Yeah. That's important. And then finally, we advise that you deposit the cash you receive on a daily basis into a secure safe and make sure that someone of high enough seniority is keeping the keys or the combination to the safe. And as frequently as possible, deposit this amount into the bank. Now, when it comes to your stocks, number one, so control the inflow of stocks, the outflow of stocks. Number one, so how to control the inflow of stocks is to make sure that you inspect goods before you receive them into inventory. So check for the quantity and the quality of goods received and issue a goods received note. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It can be a notebook. Record that I've received this quantity of goods into my warehouse. Number two, control the outflow. So that means that document the quantity of goods that you are issuing out of inventory and make sure that there's an approval process before items are issued out of inventory so that any employee cannot just go into inventory and take out anything they want. There should be proper approval. And once something goes out of inventory, there should be enough documentation. So issue a store issue voucher. Again, it could be a simple notebook. I've taken out this item. It was approved by this person. And there are so many technology tools that you can use to achieve the same. Now, the third point on inventory is make sure that you inspect and count stocks at least on a monthly basis. If your stocks are so much that you can't count everything at a go, make sure that you count it on a monthly basis, at least count a portion of it, so that probably in a quarter you'd have counted everything. And reconcile the results from this stock count to what is recorded in your books. Another key point is that don't allow the person who is responsible for keeping the stocks to count the inventory. It's very important. Don't allow the person who is responsible for keeping, so for instance, the warehouse manager, don't allow the warehouse manager to be responsible for counting and reconciling. It allows the person to steal again, basically.
Again, the issue of segregation of duties, as we mentioned earlier, comes in. So you don't allow the same person who keeps the stock or controls it to count
again.
So an independent person should do that.
Yes. So there's an account of a retail distribution business which did not implement some of the controls I've told you about. So this allows sales staff to steal inventory and manipulate stock reports to hide their fraudulent activity. So when the business began to implement some of the inventory controls we've advised about, the staff quickly manipulated customer records to hide their fraud. So, the business also improved and kept implementing further controls in their sales process, and they caught on to what the sales staff had done. Currently, the business estimates that it has lost over 30,000 Ghana cedis through this fraud, and is still in the process of retrieving these funds. So it's important that as a retail business, control your cash, control your inventory.
Wow, that's quite elaborate. And so, Nana, let me come back to you. Are there any easy targets for occupational fraudsters?
Yes, your monetary accounts, such as your bank account and mobile money and petty cash, are the easy pickings for fraudsters, especially in this age where cyber fraud is on the rise. You need to ensure that you put in place certain control measures to help shield you against its occurrence. With regards to your bank account and your cash, it's advisable to use online payments. These are secure, they are safe, and they are fast. It also helps you and with online payments, try as much as possible to reduce the use of cash. Ideally, cash creates the opportunity for anything to occur. But when you are using an online platform, you are eliminating the use of cash. You are protecting your bank account, and it's easy to get a paper trail to keep track of what's happening to your cash and your bank account. Also, you need to reconcile your bank account on a regular basis, at least monthly. It's essential that when reconciling your account, you need to let someone else aside your accountant or the person who manages the supplier and customer invoices and processes payments does this. If you can't get someone to do it, I advise you do it yourself, or you outsource to a professional who will be there to do it for you and keep track of your reconciliation to ensure that they are done appropriately. And finally, you need to watch your bank account, subscribe to bank alerts, and review activities on your bank statement on a regular basis, at least weekly. With a subscription to the bank account, if you can go for emails or text messages. So if there's any activity happening on your account, you can easily detect it to ensure that they are for the business purposes or someone is trying to taking advantage of your account. There was an instance several years ago where an accountant with one of our clients was able to get access to a cancelled check. And as a result of this, he withdrew an amount of 2,000 Ghana cedi. The general manager only found out because he reviewed the bank statement for the previous month. See, this fraud could have been prevented if the checkbooks were kept secured in a safe, and the CEO should have kept the checkbooks instead of the accountants. Also, voided checks and cancelled checks should be done properly to prevent them from being presented to the bank for withdrawal.
Wow. So I think technology also helps in this sense, because once you subscribe to these online services from the bank, it helps you. And business owners must be interested in that, because
Exactly.
you shouldn't see it as a border that the bank will be sending them alerts here and there, but rather they should see it as a form of control over their own assets or the assets of the business. And thank you, Nana, for that point. So let me remind our audience that you can send in your questions, comments, and observations you can post them into the Q&A box below. I've seen already some coming through, so please keep them coming, and then we will address all those questions at the end of the session. So Emil,
Yes.
just before we go and see the questions we have, any advice for business owners and top executives when it comes to occupational fraud?
Yeah, so in the current business and economic environment that we find ourselves, the risk of fraud, is heightened. And so as a business owner, as a CEO, as a GM, you need to increase your fraud awareness and also, appraise yourself on how to prevent fraud. Some of the tips we've given you before is to reduce or remove the opportunities for fraud. And one of the surest ways of doing this is by implementing proper controls, like we've discussed above in the presentation. We also advise that separate or segregate the duties of employees, so that one employee cannot approve a transaction, hold the asset, and also record transactions.
Okay, so in addition to what Emil addressed, also ensure that you implement a strong hiring process, perform background checks, reference checks, criminal records checks, and also make sure that you enforce mandatory leave for your staff. Also, ensure that controls such as approval, verification, and reconciliation are enforced in your business. And lastly, secure your assets, such as the key assets which are prone to fraud, such as your bank, your petty cash, and your inventory.
I like the bit about the leave, where, it doesn't only give you the opportunity to rest, but also the business the opportunity to, look out for things that might have gone wrong or that you have been doing that are not in the interest of the organization. So I would like to go and see if there are questions from our audience. Then we'll start addressing those questions. Yes, as I indicated, you can post your questions in the Q&A box below, and we would attend to the questions. Emil, somebody has just sent in a question. Maybe you can prepare for that. He said, what controls can be kept where the senior person, who is also the sole signatory of the bank account, takes loans from the entity? And he said, please advise on who approved his or her loan.
Okay, so let me understand. So it's a senior person. He's a sole signatory on the bank account, and he also takes loans from the entity.
Yes.
So the question is to advise on who will approve his loan request.
Yes, that's a question. It's an
It's an interesting
one.
question.
Yes.
Is this person the owner of the business? Is he the MD? Who is he?
Let's say it's an MD.
Yeah, I mean, if he's the MD, he'll probably report to his board. So whatever happens, if there's no one above him to approve the loan request, usually it will probably go to the board. The board needs to approve if it's a significant loan that he's taking from the business. So whatever it is, there should always be extra oversight. The key here is that one person should not have unfettered access. So even if it's the MD, the things he does should still get approval, and possibly the person, usually the board, would give approval for remuneration for the MD and other key transactions. But it's always important that someone above whoever it is will give the approval.
Yes. Okay. So in this case, it could even be the person has clarified. He said is a director.
Okay.
Only reports to investors who are not involved in operations. So maybe the board of directors may be the ones to approve in this case. Maybe.
Yes.
All right. So you can visit our website at www.scg.com.gh for more information on some of these topics that we have discussed today. We have several resources there or articles there that you can refer to on fraud deterrence, internal control, how to create condition for strong controls in your business, inventory control to prevent waste and theft, controls over cash receipts, simple steps to improve control over petty cash. These are all resources that you can get on our website anytime you visit our website. Okay, so there are. Okay, so Emil, one more question has come through. This one, no name, anonymous. It said, how does a small business factor in cost in relation to implementing the controls discussed? Obviously, controls comes with cost. Yeah. So I think the question is trying to find out how does companies factor in cost when it comes to implementation of controls.
Yes, so when it comes to controls, you have to have the right balance between the costs of the control and the benefits that the control gives you. So it's important that the costs don't outweigh the benefits. So sometimes you should look at the potential effects of the fraud happening. If it could devastate your business, you need to take extra precaution and mitigate the fraud. If you don't have enough funds, like we said, if you don't have enough funds to employ an additional finance officer, what you could do is to look around the organization. Who can you give more responsibility to? To take off some of the load from the finance officers and to also remove that ability to commit the fraud. So it's a very fine balance between the cost of the control and the benefits that the control gives, making sure that the costs don't outweigh the benefits. If the costs outweigh the benefits, then you need to look around and see, get creative. You as the MD, CEO, take on more responsibility on approving transactions. Don't let your accounting staff hold the assets. Checkbooks, petty cash, don't let them hold it. MD, keep the checkbooks. You can give your petty cash to the front desk, the secretary to hold it. And accounting guys will focus on recording transactions.
Yeah. And even if, I think, if it's difficult to, find resources in-house to, get some of these controls in place, it's advisable that you look around and get a good accounting firm to outsource some of these processes too. I think that brings in more, it will improve the way things are done, because they may be outside the organization and they can be very objective when it comes to handling of some of these control issues. Okay. Who else is there? There's a question. Okay. Okay, somebody is suggesting that in the case given by you, Emil, where the MD or the CEO takes a loan, he said, in the example given, the board must create an approval process.
Yeah.
So as we indicated earlier, the board must oversee what the MD or the director also does. Yes. So they must have the capacity to approve before he takes. Okay. So I think we've exhausted the points so far, and well, there's another question. Let me look at it. Okay. Okay, so Esther Adumakun, she says, thank you for the education. Based on the presentation so far, it's directed to employees and company internal fraud. My question is, how can SMEs prevent fraudulent risk arising from external environment? That's an interesting one.
It's an interesting one. Today we're looking at, fraud, occupational fraud that is being committed from within the organization. But just to touch on fraud that could come from the external environment. So again, it's a matter of controls. So if you take, for instance, selecting your suppliers, make sure that, even before you accept to work with a supplier, make sure that you know enough about the supplier. So you see that when you want to work with big organizations, they have a tall list of documents you must supply to them. So your incorporation documents, blah, blah, blah. They are using all of this to make sure that you are credible.
Yeah.
They look out for someone who has integrity. Have there been any bad reports about the person in the past?
Yeah.
Etc. So as a business, if you want to, reduce or prevent risk from the external environment, make sure that the people you work with, your customers, your suppliers, they are people of integrity. You can do that by looking, are they a duly registered business? How do they perform their activities? Do they do so ethically? So these are ways of, reducing the risk from external environments. Make sure that you have a good contract with your suppliers, with your customers. Make sure that your legal guys go over it. In the case of anything going wrong, you have a good ironclad contract that you can
yes, refer to. Yeah. So I think it's very good. Simply, you must do some due diligence on your suppliers before you engage them. This is coming from Peter. He said, interesting discussion going on. I would like to find out what criteria you will use in selecting an inventory software. I'm not sure Emil and Nana would be in position right now to answer that one. Maybe that will be another discussion for another day.
Yes.
But
yes.
Peter, your question is well noted. Would keep an eye on that, and then maybe come out with something around that. Okay, this is from an anonymous attendee. He said, employees like friendly workplace. How would you balance between preventing familiarity and creating a friendly environment?
That's also an interesting one.
Yeah.
For the organization to thrive, there has to be a friendly environment. For people to feel at home where they work, they must enjoy, the work they do. But as management, you need to make sure that you've put in controls. Controls doesn't mean people will not be friendly with each other, but the controls make sure that things get done a certain way. And, you put in place checks and balances to reduce or prevent fraud. So, stuff like making sure that one person approves the transaction, making sure that the same person does not keep the assets and also accounts for the transaction.
Okay.
And that's something that can easily be done.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that people should not be friendly or familiar with each other.
Okay. All right. So Peter, just to remind you, on the issue of the software, we have a blog or an article published on our website, which discusses how you can select a software for your accounting or for inventory. So you can visit our website www.scg.com.gh, and then you will find the article there. It will be very helpful, I believe. From another anonymous person, he said, very informative session. A quick question. As a remote accountant, how can you ensure there is no fraud if one of the owners of the company and another senior staff issue source documents and hold assets?
That's interesting. That's okay. So let me understand the question. The person is a remote accountant.
Yes.
Which means that he's not on site.
Sure.
Okay. How do you ensure that there's no fraud if one of the owners of the company and another senior staff issue source documents and hold assets?
Yeah.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting. It's something we have to think about.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So we'll definitely get back to you.
Sure. So some of the things that, some of the questions, unfortunately, maybe time will not permit us to go through all the questions, but for those that we have been able to answer, you can send a follow-up question if you are not clear about them. And then for those who we are not able to answer immediately, we would address all of them one way or the other, either by writing a blog to address them, or we can organize another session in future to address your specific needs. But we are grateful for your questions. So, Emil, I think we are almost done, because we are done almost 1 hour now. So as I indicated, of course, fraud can devastate your business, and there's no doubt about that, as my colleagues have helped us to understand how it can impact or affect your business. So it is important that you put in measures as a business to deter people from even, starting to think about it, let alone it's, starting. So thank you for the insightful discussion. And we believe that when next we call you to come over, you'll be available to help us discuss in detail some of the issue relating to fraud. And for you, those of us who join us, we are grateful for your time. We appreciate your time joining us. And we believe that you will join us in our subsequent webinars. And you can also visit our website, www.scg.com.gh, for more information and resources on issues relating to fraud and other topics that affect your business, such as payroll, accounting, tax, and audit. And if you want to send us email, you can send us email at info@scg.com.gh, and we would attend to your emails accordingly. So Emil and Nana, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time and in-depth analysis on this subject, and we hope to see you again. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and for those who sent us questions. We can still keep the questions coming in, and we would address them. Thank you, and have a great day.